Hey, thank you for clicking in. This is Her Kingdom. Today, a devoted mother is told there is no seat for her at Thanksgiving. She doesn't scream. She hands her son an envelope that destroys his world. Stay to the end.
My name is Geraldine Ballin. I am 68 years old. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with my husband Patrick, who is 71. And 3 weeks ago, on Thanksgiving Day, my son Scott and his wife Jessie removed my chair from their dining table. Not by accident, on purpose. In front of 19 people, I want to tell you exactly what happened that day and what I did about it. But first, let me set the scene so you understand everything clearly. My son Scott is 44 years old. He lives in Naperville, Illinois, about 90 miles from us. He has a good job in finance. He has a beautiful house. He has 2 children, my grandchildren. Emma, who is 11, and Cooper, who is 8. His wife Jessie is 41. She works in marketing. She is organized, she is polished, and from the very first year she married Scott, she made it quietly clear that she was in charge of how that household ran. Including holidays, including who sat where. Patrick and I have been married for 46 years. We are not difficult people. We do not show up unannounced. We do not interfere. We raised Scott to be respectful, to work hard, and to take care of his family. And for a long time, we thought we had. So when Scott called 3 weeks before Thanksgiving and asked me to come, I said yes. He asked me to bring my sweet potato casserole, the same one I have brought to every Thanksgiving for 21 years. His grandmother's recipe, the one he used to sneak spoonfuls of straight from the dish when he thought I wasn't looking. I said I would bring it. Patrick did not want to go. He told me the night before, sitting at our kitchen table in Milwaukee, that something felt off. That Jessie's text, the one that said we're seating 20 so space is tight, just FYI, was not really about space. I told him he was probably right, but I still wanted to go. I needed to look my son in the eye. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. and made the casserole from scratch. Brown sugar, butter, fresh sweet potatoes. The way my mother taught me. The way I taught Scott's daughter Emma last Christmas when she stood on a step stool next to me and asked to help. Patrick drove 90 miles. We barely talked. He held my hand at a red light just outside of Joliet and said, "Whatever happens today, we go home together." I squeezed his hand and nodded. We pulled into Scott's driveway at noon. The house looked nice. Wreath on the door, cars lining both sides of the street. I could see through the front window that the dining room was already full of movement. I carried the casserole to the front door. Patrick rang the bell, Jessie opened the door. She looked at the dish in my hands, then back up at me. "Oh good, you made it," she said, "not warm, just efficient." She took the casserole from me before I could even step inside and said, "I'll put this in the kitchen." Not on the table. The kitchen, I noticed that, but I said nothing. The house was full. Jessie's parents were there, her sister's husband, cousins, neighbors, people I had met once or twice and people I had never seen before. Scott came over and hugged me, a quick hug, the kind that says hello without really saying anything. "Glad you made it, Mom," he said. Then someone called his name from the other room and he was gone. I walked to the dining room. The table was long, extended with a leaf, set with matching plates and little paper name cards at every seat. I looked for mine. I walked slowly around the left side of the table. Nothing. I walked around the right side. Nothing. I checked again, every card, every seat. My name was not there. Patrick came up beside me quietly and looked at the table. He looked at me. I shook my head just slightly. "Not yet." I found Jessie in the kitchen arranging serving dishes. "Jessie," I said, keeping my voice low and calm, "I don't see my name at the table." She didn't look up right away. She finished placing a spoon in a dish. Then she turned to me. "Oh," she said, "just, oh." We ran out of room. "We have Linda's mother visiting from Tucson. She needs a seat. You don't mind eating in the kitchen after, do you? Once everyone is finished." I looked at her. Once everyone is finished, like I was the help. I walked back into the dining room. Quietly, I did not raise my voice. I did not cause a scene. 19 people were finding their seats, talking, laughing, pouring drinks. I stood at the edge of the room, and that is when Jessie's voice rose above the noise. Loud enough for the room to hear, loud enough that conversations stopped one by one until the room went quiet. She looked directly at me and said, "There is no room at this table for disappointments, Geraldine." Nobody spoke. Not Scott, not Patrick. Not one person in that room said a single word. I stood there for a moment, then I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out a plain white envelope. I walked to where Scott was sitting, at the far end of the table, and I placed the envelope on his plate. I looked at my son, and I said, quietly and clearly, "I raised you better than this, Scott." Then Patrick and I walked out the front door. But before I tell you what was inside that envelope, before I tell you what Scott said when he called 4 weeks later, and before I tell you what Patrick said inside that dining room that made Jesse's mother look down at the floor, you need to understand how we got here, because this did not start on Thanksgiving Day. This started years ago, and I missed every sign. Patrick and I got married in the summer of 1978. We were young. We had very little money. Patrick was working at his father's hardware store in Milwaukee. I was a school secretary at Jefferson Elementary. Together, we brought home enough to pay rent, buy groceries, and save a little at the end of each month. We were not wealthy people, but we were steady people. And steady over 46 years adds up to something. Scott was born in 1980. He was our only child, not by choice. We wanted more. But after Scott, the pregnancies did not come. So we poured everything into him, not in a spoiling way, in a deliberate way. We made sure he had what he needed. Good schools, sports, family vacations to the Wisconsin Dells every summer. He was a good kid, respectful, funny, the kind of boy who carried groceries for the elderly woman next door without being asked. I am not telling you this to make Scott sound perfect. I am telling you this so you understand. The son I raised and the man sitting at that Thanksgiving table were not always the same person. Something changed along the way, and her name was Jessie. Now, I want to be fair here. I am not blaming Jessie for everything. A grown man makes his own choices. Scott chose to go along with things. Scott chose silence when he should have spoken. I will get to that. But Jessie set the tone from the very beginning. They met in 2007. Scott was 27. He brought her home to Milwaukee for Easter that first year, and she sat at our table and smiled and said all the right things. She complimented my cooking. She asked Patrick about the hardware store. She seemed warm. I believed it. Patrick believed it a little less, but he said nothing. They married in 2010. Big wedding in Chicago. Patrick and I paid for a significant portion of it because Jessie's parents, good people, don't get me wrong, simply did not have the funds. We did not announce that. We did not bring it up at dinner or put it in a speech. We just wrote the check because Scott was our son and we wanted his day to be beautiful. That was the first thing. In 2012, Scott called us with exciting news. He had found a house in Naperville, a good neighborhood, good school district, 3 bedrooms, a yard for the kids they were planning to have. The price was $287,000. He and Jessie had saved enough for a small down payment, but not enough to avoid a high interest rate. Patrick and I talked it over for one evening, just one. Then we transferred $40,000 from our savings account to help them get a better rate and lower monthly payments. Scott said thank you. Jessie said it was very generous. And then, that was that. It was never mentioned again. Not a card on the anniversary of the purchase. Not a mention at Christmas. Nothing. Again, we did not do it for recognition. We did it because he was our son. But I want you to understand what $40,000 meant to 2 people living on a hardware store income and a school secretary's pension. It meant something. Emma was born in 2013. Cooper came in 2016. Those babies were the joy of our lives. Patrick became a different man the moment Emma was placed in his arms. Softer, more patient. He would drive 90 miles on a random Tuesday just to sit with her for a few hours and drive home. When Jessie went back to work after Cooper turned 1, she needed childcare. Good daycare in Naperville was expensive. So Patrick and I made an offer. We would drive down every Monday and Friday. We would take the children for the full day. We did this for 4 years, every Monday, every Friday, 180 miles round trip, every single week. We did not charge them. We did not complain. We packed our own lunches, brought activities for the kids, and drove home in the evening. I have the mileage written down in a notebook. I will tell you more about that notebook later. Jessie accepted this arrangement without much comment. It was simply expected. After a while, it felt less like a gift we were giving and more like a service we were providing. The difference matters. The small things started around 2018. That was when Jesse began referring to my cooking as a little heavy and old-fashioned. Not directly to me at first, to Scott. But Scott would mention it casually, the way people do when they don't realize they're delivering a message. Jesse thinks maybe we could do something lighter for Christmas dinner this year. Jesse found this new caterer she really likes. Jesse feels like it might be easier if we host and just handle the food ourselves. Each one of those sentences, on its own, sounds like nothing. But when you hear a version of it every few months for 5 years, it starts to sound like something. It starts to sound like you are being slowly moved out of your own place in your son's life. Then came the Christmases. Patrick and I had hosted Christmas in Milwaukee for 22 years straight. Scott came every year as a child and continued coming as an adult. It was not a formal rule. It was just what we did. Our home, our tree, our table. In 2019, Jessie decided they would spend Christmas with her parents in Cincinnati instead. Scott called to tell me, "Just this once," he said. "In 2020 we understood. The world was shut down and travel was complicated. Everyone stayed home. In 2021, they went to Cincinnati again. 3 years in a row. Patrick and I spent Christmas 2021 at our kitchen table in Milwaukee, just the two of us. Turkey breast for two from the grocery store, a small tree in the corner. I did not call Scott to complain. I did not send a long message. I called on Christmas morning, talked to Emma and Cooper for 10 minutes, wished Scott and Jesse a happy holiday, and hung up. Then I sat back down at the table with Patrick and I thought to myself, this is not keeping the peace. This is just losing, quietly. I want you to understand something before we go further. Patrick and I did not give to this family because we wanted to be praised. We gave because that is what you do when you love someone. But love, real love, is not supposed to move in only one direction forever. At some point, the other person is supposed to turn around and see you standing there. Scott had stopped turning around, and I had been standing there for a very long time. In February of 2023, I slipped on ice on our front porch in Milwaukee. It was a Tuesday morning. Patrick had already left for his volunteer shift at the Veterans Center. I was taking the recycling bin to the curb. One step off the porch and my left foot went out from under me. I went down hard. I fractured my hip. The neighbor across the street, Carol Dempsey, saw me fall from her window and called 911. I am grateful for Carol, because I was lying on that frozen porch for almost 10 minutes before the ambulance arrived, and the whole time I was thinking, where is my son? Not in an angry way, just. That is what you think when you are lying on cold concrete, and you are 67 years old and you are in pain. You think about your child. I had surgery 2 days later, a partial hip replacement. I spent 5 days in the hospital, and then 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility on the north side of Milwaukee. Patrick was there every single day. He drove to the rehab facility every morning, sat with me through lunch, went home to take care of the house, and came back in the evenings. He is 71 years old, and he did that every day for 6 weeks without one word of complaint. That is the man I married. Scott called the day of the surgery. He called again 3 days later. Then the calls got further apart. Every few days, then once a week, he visited once. He drove up from Naperville on a Saturday, stayed for 4 hours, and drove home in 6 weeks. I did not say anything to him about it. He had work. He had the children. I understood all of that. I told myself I understood all of that, but I wrote it down in my notebook. Now let me tell you about the notebook. After the third missed Christmas, the 2021 one where Patrick and I sat alone with a turkey breast for two, I started keeping a simple spiral notebook in my nightstand drawer. Nothing dramatic. No angry entries, just dates and facts. December 25, 2021. Scott and Jesse in Cincinnati. 3rd year in a row, no visit. February 14, 2023. Hip fracture surgery. Scott visited once. 4 hours, 6 weeks total recovery. I was not keeping score in a bitter way. I was keeping clarity, because I had noticed something about myself over the years. When enough time passes between a hurt and the moment you need to talk about it, the details go fuzzy. You start to second-guess yourself. You think maybe you are remembering it wrong. Maybe you are being too sensitive. The notebook made sure I could not talk myself out of what was real. Now let me tell you about Jesse's mother, Linda. Linda is 67. She lives in Cincinnati. She is perfectly pleasant in small doses. Patrick has always been polite to her. I have always been polite to her. About 4 months after my hip surgery. In June of 2023, Linda sprained her ankle, not fractured, not surgery, a sprain. Jesse drove to Cincinnati, picked Linda up, and brought her back to Naperville. Linda stayed for 2 months. 2 full months in Scott and Jesse's home. Guest room made up. Meals cooked. Jesse working from home twice a week to keep her company. Scott taking her to her follow-up appointments. I heard about this from Emma during one of our phone calls. Grandma Jerry, Grandma Linda is staying with us. She has a hurt foot. Mommy made her a whole basket with movies and candy. I said that was very kind of Mommy. Then I opened my notebook and I wrote it down. I am not telling you this to say that Linda did not deserve care. She did. Any mother does. I am telling you this because of what it showed me. Jessie was capable of showing up completely for a parent in need. She simply chose not to when that parent was me, and Scott let her make that choice. He called me during Linda's stay to tell me about it, casually, like he was reporting the weather. Yeah, Linda's been with us a couple months. Her ankle's been rough. I said that was very kind of them to have her. He said, yeah, Jess is good like that. I held the phone and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, and I thought about lying on that frozen porch in February. I thought about Carol Dempsey calling 911. I thought about Patrick driving to that rehab facility every single morning. And I thought about my son, visiting once for 4 hours. That fall, Patrick sat me down at the kitchen table one evening after dinner. He folded his hands the way he does when he has thought something through and is ready to say it plainly. He said, Jerry, you need to talk to Scott, not a hint. Not a suggestion, a real conversation. I told him he was right. He said, so when? I said I was waiting for the right moment. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said, Jerry, you have been waiting for the right moment for about 5 years now. And every time the right moment doesn't come, they take a little more and you say a little less. That is not patience. That is disappearing. I did not argue with him, because he was right. I had been confusing silence with grace. I had been telling myself that keeping quiet was the loving thing to do, that a good mother does not create conflict, that I should be grateful for what I had and not complain about what I was losing. But the truth was simpler than that. I was afraid that if I said something, really said something, Scott would pull away completely. And I would rather have a little of my son than none of him at all. That fear kept me quiet through the rest of 2023 and into 2024. But something was changing inside me. Slowly, the way water changes stone. Not all at once, but steadily. I was getting tired of disappearing. The call came on a Monday morning in early November. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal. Patrick was at the table reading the newspaper the way he does every morning. The phone rang and I looked at the screen. Scott, I answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. His voice was normal, not warm, not cold, just efficient, the way he sounds when he is calling between meetings. Hey, sweetheart. How are the kids? Good, good. Listen, we're doing a big Thanksgiving this year. Whole family. Jesse's parents, her sister, some friends of ours. We want you and Dad to come down. I looked across the kitchen at Patrick. He had put down his newspaper. Of course, I said. We would love that. Great. Can you bring your sweet potato casserole? You know how everyone loves it. I told him I would make it fresh the morning of. He said great a second time, and then he was already wrapping up the call. In less than 3 minutes. No, how are you feeling? No, how is Dad's knee? No mention of the fact that we had not seen each other since a brief visit in August. Just come bring the casserole, goodbye. I set the phone down on the counter. Patrick said, what did he say? I told him. He picked his newspaper back up and said quietly, something is off. The text from Jesse came 2 days later. I was folding laundry when it arrived. I read it once, put the phone down, finished folding a pillowcase, then read it again. It said, Hi Geraldine, just a heads up, we're seating about 20 people so space is going to be tight. Just FYI, can't wait to see you both. That was the whole message. Now on the surface that sounds like a polite warning about a crowded table, but I have known Jessie for 17 years. Jessie does not send messages without a purpose. Every word she writes means something. She is a marketing professional. She chooses her words carefully. Space is going to be tight. Just FYI, she was not warning me about chairs. She was warning me about my place. I showed the text to Patrick that evening. He read it, handed the phone back, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Jerry, I don't think we should go." I told him I understood why he felt that way. He said, "Then let's stay home. I'll take you to Carmela's for Thanksgiving dinner. Nice restaurant, no drama, home by 8. I smiled at him. I genuinely considered it for about 10 seconds. Then I said, "Patrick, I need to go. I need to sit across from my son and I need him to see me. Really see me. Not the version of me that just sends casseroles and asks no questions. Me." He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded once. He did not agree that it was the right decision, but he respected that it was my decision. That is 46 years of marriage right there. The following Thursday, I drove to downtown Milwaukee and visited my attorney. Her name is Dorothy Callahan. I have used Dorothy for years. She handled our wills, our property documents, a small business matter Patrick had years ago. She is thorough and she is direct, and I trust her completely. I want to be clear about why I went. I was not going to punish Scott. I was not going in anger. I had been meaning to update certain documents for over a year and kept putting it off. The hip surgery had reminded me that Patrick and I were not getting younger. It was simply time to get things in order. But I will be honest with you, Jesse's text moved up my timeline. Dorothy and I sat in her office for 2 hours. We reviewed everything. The will, the property, a savings account Patrick and I had been building quietly for years specifically for Emma and Cooper's education. That last item, the education account, I asked Dorothy to restructure it. Instead of leaving it to pass through Scott and Jesse, I asked her to set it up as a direct trust for Emma and Cooper, managed independently. Available to them when they turned 18 for education expenses, not accessible to anyone else. Dorothy asked me if I was sure. I said I was sure. She drew up the documents. I signed them that afternoon. I also asked her to prepare a simple letter, not legal language, plain English, something I could put in an envelope and leave with Scott if the moment called for it. Dorothy looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Geraldine, are you expecting trouble at Thanksgiving?" I said, "Dorothy, I am expecting clarity." She printed the letter. I folded it, put it in a plain white envelope, and drove home. I did not tell Patrick about the envelope, not because I was hiding it from him. Patrick and I do not hide things from each other after 46 years. I simply did not want him to worry. He would have spent the next 2 weeks rehearsing what to say and working himself up. I wanted him calm on Thanksgiving Day. I put the envelope in my coat pocket and left it there. That weekend, I called Emma. She picked up on the first ring the way she always does. 11 years old and already she answers the phone better than most adults I know. We talked for 20 minutes about school, about a book she was reading, about Cooper losing another tooth. At the end of the call she said, "Grandma Jerry, are you coming for Thanksgiving?" I said, "Yes, sweetheart, I am coming." She said, "Good. I saved you the seat next to me." I held the phone after she hung up and sat very still for a moment. My granddaughter saved me a seat. I wrote that down in my notebook too. I woke up at 6 a.m. on Thanksgiving Day. Patrick was still asleep. The house was quiet. It was the kind of cold November morning where the radiator ticks and the windows are fogged at the edges and everything outside looks gray and still. I put on my robe and went to the kitchen. I did not turn on the television. I did not check my phone. I just started cooking. Sweet potatoes first. I bought them fresh from the market 2 days before. I peeled them at the counter, cut them into chunks and set them to boil. While they cooked, I measured out the brown sugar, the butter, the cinnamon, the vanilla. I toasted the pecans in a dry pan until the kitchen smelled warm and nutty. My mother taught me this recipe in her kitchen in Green Bay when I was 12 years old. She made it every Thanksgiving until she passed in 2009. When she was gone, I kept making it. Every year, same dish, same recipe, same smell filling up whatever kitchen I was standing in. I have made this casserole 21 times for Scott's Thanksgiving table. I made it a 22nd time that morning. Not because I was trying to prove something. Because it was the right thing to do. That is who I am. Patrick came into the kitchen at 7:30. He was already dressed, pressed shirt, good trousers. He looked at the casserole dish on the counter and then at me. "You've been up a while," he said. Since 6, he poured himself a coffee and stood beside me at the counter. We did not talk much. We did not need to. After 46 years, Patrick and I have a language that does not always need words. He knew I was steadying myself. He let me do it. At one point, he put his hand on my back for just a moment. That was enough. We loaded the car at 9:30. I wrapped the casserole dish in a towel to keep it warm and set it carefully on the floor behind the passenger seat. Patrick backed out of the driveway, and we headed south toward the interstate. The drive from Milwaukee to Naperville takes about 90 minutes depending on traffic. On Thanksgiving morning, the highway was quiet, just a few trucks and a handful of cars. Everyone else was already where they were going. We passed through Racine and Kenosha and crossed into Illinois just before 10:30. The landscape flattened out, bare trees, pale sky, dry fields on both sides of the road. About halfway through the drive, Patrick reached over and held my hand. He said, "Whatever happens today, we go home together." I looked at him. He was staring at the road ahead, both hands back on the wheel, calm as a man can be. I said, "I know," and I meant it both ways. Whatever happens, we go home together. That was the only thing I needed to be sure of before we pulled into that driveway. We arrived in Naperville just before noon. Scott and Jesse's neighborhood was quiet the way suburbs go quiet on holidays. American flags on a few porches. A basketball hoop at the end of the cul-de-sac. Leaves along the curb that nobody had gotten around to raking. Their house looked well put together from the outside. Wreath on the front door. 2 small pumpkins on the porch steps even though it was already past Halloween. A warm light coming through the front window. I counted 4 cars in the driveway and 3 more parked along the curb. Jesse's parents had a white sedan I recognized. There was a minivan I did not know. A newer SUV parked crooked like someone had arrived in a hurry. We parked behind the last car on the street. I reached back and picked up the casserole dish from the floor, still warm through the towel. Patrick came around and walked beside me up the front path. I had the envelope in my coat pocket. I was hoping I would not need it. Jessie opened the door before Patrick could ring the bell. She was dressed nicely. Hair done. A holiday sweater that looked like it had been chosen carefully. She had a glass of sparkling water in one hand and the look of someone managing a great number of things at once. She looked at the casserole dish in my arms. "Oh good, you made it," she said. Not, "Hello Geraldine, so glad you're here." Not, "Come in, let me take your coats." Just, "Oh good, you made it," like checking an item off a list. She reached out and took the casserole dish from me before I had fully stepped through the door. "I'll put this in the kitchen," she said, already turning away. I watched her carry it down the hall and disappear around the corner. Patrick put his hand briefly on my lower back as we stepped inside. I hung up my own coat. The house was full and loud. Jesse's mother, Linda, was in the living room, holding court on the sofa with 2 women I did not recognize. Her father was standing near the fireplace, talking to a man about football. Jesse's sister and her husband were in the corner near the bookshelf. Children were running through the hallway. Scott appeared from the direction of the kitchen. He hugged me, quick, firm. The hug of a man who is hosting 20 people and has a lot on his mind. "Glad you made it, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." Someone called his name from the other room and he was already moving. I watched him go. Then I turned to the dining room. The table was beautiful, I will give Jesse that. Extended with both leaves. White tablecloth. Real plates, not the paper kind. Small candles down the center. A little card at every place setting with a name written in neat handwriting. I counted the seats. 20 place settings. I walked slowly along the left side of the table reading each card. Linda, Linda's sister. Jesse's father, Jesse's mother. Jesse's sister, her husband. Names I recognized, names I did not. I walked along the right side. Scott, Jesse, Emma, Cooper, more of Jesse's relatives. I reached the end of the table. I went back to the beginning and checked every single card one more time. My name was not there. Patrick's name was not there. Neither of us had a seat at our son's Thanksgiving table. I found Jessie in the kitchen. She was arranging serving spoons in dishes. Busy, purposeful, not looking up. "Jessie," I said, my voice was low, steady. "I don't see our names at the table." She finished placing a spoon. Then she turned to me with an expression I can only describe as prepared, like she had already rehearsed this moment. "Oh," she said. We ran out of room. Linda's mother came in from Tucson last minute. We needed the extra seats. You and Patrick don't mind eating in the kitchen after, do you? Once everyone is finished. Once everyone is finished. I looked at my sweet potato casserole sitting on the kitchen counter, not on the table. In the corner of the counter next to the coffee maker. I thought about waking up at 6 a.m. I thought about my mother's recipe. I thought about 22 Thanksgivings. I thought about $40,000 and 180 miles every Monday and Friday for 4 years, and one visit in 6 weeks, when I was lying in a rehabilitation facility with a fractured hip. I did not say any of that. I simply said, I see, and I walked back to the dining room. I stood at the edge of the dining room. Patrick was beside me. He had heard everything from the hallway. He did not say a word. He just stood close enough that his arm was touching mine. The room was filling up now. People finding their seats, chairs scraping the floor, glasses being filled. The noise of 19 people settling in for a holiday meal. I watched Scott move around the table, pulling out chairs, laughing at something Jesse's father said. He looked relaxed, happy even. The comfortable ease of a man in his own home, surrounded by people who made him feel good. He did not look at me once. Jessie came out of the kitchen carrying a serving dish. She set it on the table and then straightened up and looked across the room. At me. The room was not fully quiet yet. There were still side conversations. Still the sound of chairs and glasses and someone's child asking for juice. But Jessie's voice carried clearly above all of it. She said, Geraldine, the kitchen is just through there. You and Patrick can get settled in there. We are about to start. A few conversations stopped. I said calmly, Jessie, I would like to understand why Patrick and I do not have seats at this table. She tilted her head slightly. The way someone does when they think you are being unreasonable. We went over this. We ran out of room. It is not a big deal. It is a big deal to me. More conversations stopped. The room was getting quieter in that slow way rooms do when people sense something is happening. Scott looked up from the far end of the table. Mom! His voice was a warning, and that one word. That single word from my son telling me to stand down in front of all these people. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not broke. Shifted. Like a door that had been stuck for years, finally coming loose on its hinges. I looked at Jessie. She looked back at me with an expression that was no longer bothering to be polite. Then she said it, loud, clear, in front of every person in that room. There is no room at this table for disappointments, Geraldine. Complete silence. Not the quiet of people minding their business. The silence of 19 people who just heard something they were not sure how to respond to. I heard Patrick exhale slowly beside me. I looked around the room. Scott was frozen at the end of the table. Emma was looking at me with wide eyes. Cooper had stopped reaching for his bread roll. Jessie's mother Linda was looking at the tablecloth. Everyone else was looking at various points around the room. Anywhere but at me, not one person spoke. Not one person said, Jessie, that is not right, or, come on, let's find a chair, or even just, Geraldine, sit here, take my seat. 19 people, silence. I stood there for a moment. I thought about being afraid. I thought about all the years I had chosen quiet over honest. All the times I had told myself it was not worth the conflict. All the times I had driven 90 miles and smiled and asked nothing and given everything and driven home wondering why I felt invisible. And then I stopped thinking about all of that, because it was done. I reached into my coat pocket. I took out the plain white envelope. I walked the length of that dining room table without hurrying, past Jessie's relatives, past Cooper, past Emma, who looked up at me as I passed, and I gave her the smallest nod so she would know I was all right. I reached Scott at the end of the table. He looked up at me. His face was a mixture of things I did not have time to sort through. Embarrassment, discomfort, something that might have been the beginning of shame. I placed the envelope on his plate. I looked at my son, and I said, quietly and clearly so that only he could hear, I raised you better than this, Scott. I turned to walk back, and that is when Patrick spoke. Now I need you to understand something about Patrick Ballin. In 46 years of marriage, Patrick has raised his voice exactly twice. He is not a dramatic man. He does not make speeches. He does not perform for rooms. When Patrick speaks, it is because he has something worth saying, and he has already thought it through completely. Patrick was still standing at the edge of the dining room where I had left him. He did not shout. He did not point. He spoke in his regular voice, which was somehow more powerful than shouting would have been. He said, I want to say something and I would like everyone to hear it. The room was already quiet. It got quieter. Jessie? He said her name simply, not angry, not cruel, just direct. My wife woke up at 6 this morning to make that casserole sitting on your kitchen counter. She has made it every Thanksgiving for 22 years. She made it because she loves her son and her grandchildren, and because that is the kind of woman she is. He paused. We paid for a significant part of this wedding. We helped with the down payment on this house. We drove 180 miles round trip every Monday and every Friday for 4 years so you could go back to work. When Geraldine fractured her hip last February, Scott came once for 4 hours. He let that sit for a moment. I am not saying these things to embarrass anyone. I am saying them because my wife has been too gracious to say them herself, and grace should not be mistaken for weakness. He looked at Scott. Son, I love you. I have loved you every day of your 44 years. But I am standing here watching you allow your mother to be spoken to this way in your own home, and I am telling you plainly. He paused once more. I do not recognize the man I am looking at right now. The room was absolutely still. Jessie's mouth was set in a tight line. Her father was looking at the table. Linda had her hands folded in her lap and was staring at the floor. Scott looked at his father for a long moment. Then he looked down at the envelope on his plate. He did not open it, he did not say anything. And that silence from my son? That was the answer I had been waiting years to receive, not because of what it confirmed about Jessie, but because of what it confirmed about how far Scott had drifted from the boy I raised. When a man watches his mother be humiliated at his own table and says nothing, you do not have a communication problem. You have a values problem. I walked back to Patrick. He held out my coat. I put it on. We walked to the kitchen together, picked up my sweet potato casserole from the counter next to the coffee maker, and carried it to the front door. Emma appeared in the hallway. She looked at me with those wide 11-year-old eyes and said in a small voice, "Grandma Jerry, are you leaving?" I crouched down in front of her. I held her face in both hands and I said, "I love you, sweet girl. You and Cooper are going to come visit Grandma and Grandpa in Milwaukee very soon. I promise." She wrapped her arms around my neck and held on for a moment. I held on too. Then I stood up, took Patrick's hand, and we walked out the front door. We did not talk for the first 20 minutes of the drive. Patrick drove. I sat with the casserole dish in my lap wrapped in its towel, still faintly warm. The interstate was quiet, gray sky pressing down on flat Illinois farmland. A few other cars heading in the same direction, everyone going somewhere after something. I looked out the passenger window and watched the mile markers pass. Patrick turned on the radio low. An oldies station out of Chicago playing something from the 70s. Neither of us registered what it was. It was just sound, something to fill the space while we both settled. Just past the Wisconsin border, Patrick said, "You all right?" I thought about it honestly before answering. "Yes," I said, "I actually am." He nodded and kept driving, and I realized I meant it. I was not all right in the sense that nothing had happened. Something had happened, something significant, something that was going to change the shape of our family in ways I could not fully predict yet. But I was all right in myself. I had not screamed, I had not crumbled. I had not begged my son to choose me or pleaded with Jessie to treat me decently. I had simply told the truth, picked up my casserole, and walked out with my husband beside me. That felt like something. That felt like the first Thanksgiving in years where I had actually shown up as myself. We stopped at a diner just outside of Racine. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon, and neither of us had eaten. The place was quiet. A few other couples, an elderly man alone at the counter with pie and coffee, a young family in the corner booth. The waitress was cheerful in the way people are when they have been on their feet since early morning and are powering through on goodwill and caffeine. We ordered turkey dinners because it was Thanksgiving, and it seemed right. Patrick got the apple pie after. I got the pecan because it was there, and because I felt like honoring the day in whatever small way I could. We sat across from each other in that vinyl booth and ate our Thanksgiving dinner in a diner outside Racine, Wisconsin. It was one of the better Thanksgivings I can remember. On the rest of the drive home, Patrick asked me about the envelope. I had not told him about it beforehand the way I mentioned. He had seen me place it on Scott's plate, but he did not know what was inside. I told him everything. The visit to Dorothy Callahan, the updated documents, the trust for Emma and Cooper, the letter. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always loved about Patrick. He listens completely before he responds. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The trust was the right thing." I said I thought so too. He said, "And the letter?" I told him what it said. The letter was 1 page, plain language, no legal terms. I wrote it myself at the kitchen table the evening after I got back from Dorothy's office, and I asked Dorothy to print it on plain paper. Nothing official looking, just words. It said this: "Patrick and I have loved you without condition for 44 years. We have shown that love not just in words, but in specific, concrete ways. We helped pay for your wedding. We contributed $40,000 toward the down payment on your home. We drove 360 miles every single week for 4 years to care for your children so that your family could move forward. We did all of this without keeping score and without asking for anything in return, because that is what parents do when they love their child. We are not writing this to collect a debt. Love is not a debt. But love is also not a one-way road that only runs in one direction forever. What we are asking for is simple. We are asking to be treated with basic dignity, to have a seat at your table, to be spoken to with the same respect you would show any other guest in your home, to have a son who sees us. We are not asking to be put first. We are asking not to be put last. The trust documents enclosed are not punishment. Emma and Cooper's future is important to us, and we want to make sure it is protected directly and clearly regardless of what happens between the adults in this family. That is a grandparent's right and responsibility. We love you, Scott. We love your children. We are not closing a door. We are simply done standing quietly outside it." Patrick did not speak for a moment after I finished reading it to him. Then he said, "You wrote that?" I said yes. He said, "Jerry, that is exactly right, every word." I folded the paper and put it back in my bag. We drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable quiet. I want to explain the trust documents in plain terms because I think it matters. Patrick and I had been building an education account for Emma and Cooper for 9 years. Quietly. A set amount moved into it automatically every month. We never talked about it at family dinners. We never used it as leverage. It was simply something we did because we wanted those children to have options when they grew up. The account had grown to a meaningful amount. Before Thanksgiving, I had that account restructured so that it passed directly to Emma and Cooper through a trust managed by Dorothy's firm. When each child turns 18, they can access it for education expenses. College, vocational training, whatever path they choose. Scott and Jesse have no access to it, not as punishment, as clarity. Because I needed to know that whatever happened between the adults, whatever distance came or did not come, those children would always have something from their grandparents that could not be argued over or redirected or forgotten. Emma and Cooper were never part of any of this. They deserved to be protected from it. There was one more thing in the envelope. A photograph. Scott at 9 years old standing in the hardware store with Patrick. Saturday morning. Scott is wearing a green jacket and holding a broom because Patrick used to let him sweep the floor on weekends, and Scott thought it was the greatest responsibility in the world. He is grinning in the photograph. The full, unguarded grin of a 9-year-old boy who feels completely at home. Patrick has his hand on Scott's shoulder, and he is looking at his son with an expression I have looked at in that photograph many times over the years. Pure, uncomplicated pride. I included it with no note, no explanation. I thought it would say more than any words I could add. 4 weeks later, on a Sunday evening in December, my phone rang. "Scott," I answered. He was quiet for a moment after I said hello. Not the efficient quiet of a man between meetings. A different kind of quiet. The kind that means something is sitting in a person's chest, and they are trying to figure out how to move it. Then he said, "Mom," I opened the envelope. I waited. He said, "I read the letter 3 times. I said, "Okay." Another pause, the photograph. His voice changed on that word. Thinned out in a way I had not heard since he was much younger. I forgot about that Saturday job at Grandpa's store. I forgot how much I loved that. I did not say anything. I let him keep going. I don't know when things got like this. His voice was unsteady now, not crying, but close. I don't know when I stopped. I don't know when I let this happen. I said, "I know." He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." And I believed him. Not because one phone call fixes 44 years or undoes a Thanksgiving or gives me back the Christmases we spent alone in Milwaukee with a turkey breast for two, but because I know my son's voice. I have known it since the first sound he made in this world. And what I heard in that phone call was not a man managing a situation. It was a boy who had gotten lost and was finally admitting it. That is a place you can work from. That is not nothing. I told him I was glad he called. I told him Patrick and I loved him. I told him that nothing in that envelope was meant to end anything. It was meant to start something. An honest conversation that was about 10 years overdue. He said he understood. He said he needed some time to think about things clearly. I said take the time you need. Before he hung up, he said one more thing. Mom, the casserole. Did you at least get to eat it? I smiled at the phone. Patrick and I had it for dinner that night, I said. It was perfect. He was quiet for a moment, then he said softly, it always is. Scott drove up to Milwaukee on a Sunday in mid-December. He came alone. No Jesse. No kids, just Scott in his car, pulling into our driveway at 11 in the morning the way he used to when he was in college and needed a home-cooked meal and a few hours of not being an adult. I saw him from the kitchen window. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out, just sitting, looking at the house. I watched him and I thought about the 9-year-old boy in the green jacket holding a broom, and I felt something in my chest that was equal parts love and grief and hope all at once. Then he got out of the car and walked up the front path. I opened the door before he knocked. Patrick shook his hand at the door, a firm handshake that held a moment longer than usual. No speech, no tension. Just a father and a son acknowledging that something had passed between them and they were both still standing. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Patrick had told me I was disappearing. The same table where I had written that letter. The same table where we had eaten our quiet Christmas dinners for 3 years while Scott was in Cincinnati. It felt right that this conversation happened there. Scott wrapped his hands around his coffee mug and looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at me and said, I don't know when I stopped seeing you. Not, I am sorry Jesse behaved that way. Not. It was a stressful day and things got out of hand. Not any of the managed, careful language I had been hearing from him for years, just that. Plain and honest and his, I don't know when I stopped seeing you. I said, I think it was gradual. I think you got busy and Jesse filled in the spaces and I made it easy for you by never saying anything. That is not entirely your fault. Some of it is mine. He looked at me. You shouldn't have had to say anything. I should have seen it. I nodded. Yes, you should have. No softening that. It was true and he knew it was true, and part of respecting my son as a grown man was letting the truth sit there without rushing to make him feel better about it. We talked for almost 3 hours. Real talking. The kind we had not done in years, maybe longer. He told me that somewhere along the way he had started seeing Patrick and me through Jessie's eyes without realizing it. That her small comments over the years. The cooking is old-fashioned. The visits are too long. Your parents are too dependent on us. Had settled into him slowly the way things do when you hear them often enough in a house you live in every day. He said he was not blaming Jesse for his own choices. He said that clearly, and I respected him for it, but he said he had not been paying attention to what he was absorbing. And by the time he could see it clearly, it had already shaped the way he behaved toward us without him fully realizing what had happened. I told him I understood that. I also told him understanding it was not the same as it being acceptable. He said, I know, Mom, I know. Patrick spoke once during that 3 hours. He waited until there was a natural pause and then he said simply, Scott, your mother and I are not looking for a perfect relationship. We are looking for an honest one. That is all, just honesty. Just show up the way we showed up for you. Scott looked at his father. He said, I hear you, Dad. Patrick nodded once and picked up his coffee. That was enough. I want to tell you where things stand now because I think you deserve the full picture and not just the difficult parts. Jessie has not called me. I did not expect her to, and I am not waiting for it. That is a bridge that will be built slowly over time, or it will not be built at all. I cannot control that. What I can control is whether I show up with honesty and basic dignity intact when the time comes. I will. Scott has called every week since that Sunday in December. Not long calls every time, sometimes just 10 minutes. How are you? How is Dad? Emma has a school concert next Thursday. Did you want to come? Normal things. The ordinary fabric of a family that is trying to find its way back to something real. The grandchildren came to Milwaukee for 3 days over Christmas. Patrick picked out a tree. I made the full Christmas dinner. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole. Emma helped me in the kitchen and stood on the step stool the way she always does. Cooper and Patrick spent 2 hours building a puzzle at the dining room table, and Patrick let him win at checkers 3 times and pretended not to. It was not a perfect Christmas, but it was ours, and that was everything. I re-enrolled in my ceramics class at the community center on Oak Street in January. I had dropped it 2 years ago because the Monday and Friday drives to Naperville took up too much of my week. Now I go every Tuesday morning. There are 11 of us in the class, mostly women my age. The instructor is a young woman named Becca who has paint on her jeans every single week and genuine enthusiasm for what she does. I am not good at ceramics. I am having the best time. Patrick started volunteering an extra day at the Veterans Center. Thursdays now in addition to his regular Tuesday shift. He comes home those evenings quieter and more settled than I have seen him in years. Doing something useful for people who need it, that is Patrick. That has always been Patrick. We are good. We are genuinely good. Now I want to talk to you directly. Not as someone who has it all figured out. I do not. But as a woman of 68 who spent too many years being grateful for less than she deserved and calling it grace. Here is what I learned. Silence is not the same as peace. I told myself for years that staying quiet was the loving choice, that a good mother does not create conflict, that keeping the family together meant absorbing whatever came at me and asking for nothing. But here is the truth. My silence did not protect my relationship with Scott. It allowed the distance to grow one small, ignored moment at a time. Every time I said nothing when I should have said something, I was not keeping the peace. I was building a wall one brick at a time and calling it patience. Real love can handle an honest conversation. If a relationship cannot survive you speaking the truth calmly and respectfully, then what you have been protecting was never the relationship. It was the comfort of the other person at the cost of your own dignity. That is not love, that is disappearing. The second thing I learned is this. You are allowed to take up space, not aggressively, not demandingly, just normally, the way any person deserves to exist in the life of someone who claims to love them. You deserve a seat at the table, not because you paid for it, not because you earned it through years of service and casseroles and 180-mile round trips. But because you are a person, because you are their mother, because basic human dignity does not have a price tag and it does not expire after a certain age. When Jessie said there was no room at that table for disappointments, she was wrong about who the disappointment was. The third thing, your children are adults. This one is harder to say and harder to hear. We love our children with everything we have. That does not change. It will never change. But a 44-year-old man is responsible for his own choices. I could not make Scott see me. I could not guilt him into decency or cry him into consideration. All I could do was tell the truth clearly, protect what needed protecting, and leave the door open. What he did with that was always going to be up to him. It still is. I hope he keeps choosing better. I believe he is trying to. Last week I took Grandma Ruth's, my mother's recipe book off the kitchen shelf. I sat at the table and went through it page by page. Her handwriting in the margins. Little notes about which recipes Patrick liked best and which ones needed more salt, and one entry that just said, "Jerry made this perfectly on her first try. She doesn't know how good she is yet." I held that book for a long time. Then I put it back on the shelf where it belongs, in a place of honor, in my kitchen, at my table with 4 chairs, and room enough for everyone who deserves to sit there. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of my story, if you have been shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort, if you have been calling silence grace and calling disappearing patience, I want to say this to you as plainly as I know how. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep the people you love warm. You are allowed to be honest. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to walk out of a room that has decided you do not belong there and know with complete certainty that the problem was never you. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is simply refuse to sit in the kitchen. I am Geraldine Ballin. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with my husband Patrick, who held my hand at a red light outside of Joliet and told me we would go home together. We did, we always do. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, I would love to read it in the comments, wherever you are today. Know that you deserve a seat at the table, every single time.